Welcome to the Adopt Well podcast, where we discuss helpful topics for anyone touched by adoption. I'm your host, Amy Bagwell, here with my co-host, friend, and fellow adoptive mama, Macy Peralt. Today we're talking with Paula of All Things Moms blog about being a foster family and adopting from foster care. Did you know there are over 437,000 kids and youth currently in foster care, and over 100,000 who are legally free for adoption? Paula has so much wisdom to offer on this topic, along with a heart of gold, so we are so excited to share this conversation with you.
All right, well, Paula, welcome to the show. Amy and I are so excited to have you, and foster care and adopting from foster care is something that we have been wanting to talk more about just throughout the Adopt Well community online and on the podcast. So we're just so thankful that we get to do this today. So would you start off by just telling us a little bit about yourself and your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me. So, my husband and I have been married for 11 years, and we have three kiddos, one biological daughter and a daughter and son that we adopted from foster care. Adoption was always like this thought, like we talked about before we got married that it's something that we would love to do, but we hadn't, planned out what that looked like. So, we had our first daughter, and a couple years went by, and we just weren't having any others. And so I actually picked up a book by Jenny Allen. It's called Anything. And in that book, she prays over her empty room. And so that's what we started doing. I just started praying over our empty bedroom that was at the time still decorated like a nursery, just waiting. And as I was praying, my heart became just 100% sure that it wasn't for an infant. It wasn't, that was not going to be its purpose. And so once I figured that out and worked through that, then we started saying, okay, well, what's going to be the new adventure? So we decided to start praying about foster care. And I actually mentioned that to a friend of mine one day at church. We were on the stairwell, and I said, hey, listen, please keep us in your prayers because we're considering foster care. She said, oh, that's great. We're having a meeting over at a friend's house tomorrow. You should come. And I thought, well, that's a little bit quicker than I intended, but okay, Lord, I'm in. And so we went to the meeting, and sure enough, we just knew that that's where the Lord was calling us. And we started the licensing process, and we're licensed in about 9 months, and began fostering. And actually, our two kiddos were our first placement.
Oh, wow. So the two kids that you have now as part of your family, are they your only two placements that you had, or have you fostered more since then?
We have had over a dozen kids come in and out of our home, but most of them are just respite. Our two kiddos are our only permanent, like long-term placement so far.
So you just touched on this a bit, but what did the process of becoming a foster family look like for you guys?
It was obviously a lot of paperwork. Everything you see in the movies is true. Huge stacks of paperwork. Um, a lot of training classes. We actually went through a therapeutic agency to become licensed for therapeutic care. So we had even more training classes than the average foster parent. And it was a long process, but it was good. We got a lot of great training. And at the end of it, ironically, we were the only ones who ended up getting our license when we did. Everyone else, for whatever reason, was stalled until several months later. So till after the holidays, and we got ours before. And, the timing obviously was just perfect timing. So.
Wow, that is crazy. It's so wild how things work out like that. I actually have a question based off of what you just said. What is therapeutic care?
So therapeutic foster care is foster care that is geared more towards children who have extreme needs or high levels of trauma. So obviously, any child that comes into foster care has experienced trauma. Just the act of coming into foster care is trauma, so it's traumatic.
Yeah.
So there are other situations, different levels of abuse, substance abuse, that sort of thing, that would make a child have different levels of care required for them. And so we went ahead and we knew we wanted the extra training, and we knew we both love kids. We'd had several years working in children's ministry and felt up to the task of any kind of either medically fragile or traumatic type event that we would be willing to help a child work through that.
Wow, I love that. So, what are some of the things that you do to help kids transition as they come into your home?
Gosh, I think honestly, my kids deserve all the credit here. My kids,
Oh,
they are so amazing. Now, obviously, in the beginning, it was a little bit hard for them too, but we have kids come in and they sit down on the floor next to them and they say, "Hey, do you want to build a puzzle?" And um, obviously, we that's what we do with them. We just kind of plan to have that time to just focus on their needs when they first get here. Some practical things. Our social workers always told us to have a bin out in the garage, and she said to take all of their belongings and put it in the bin because you never know if it has any bugs, um, other things that you wouldn't want in your home, even substances, drugs, and that kind of thing, residue on it. So everything goes out in the garage so that you don't have to worry about that or anything else. You can focus on the children. And also, it gets those items out of sight in case they're triggers. So we go ahead and get those things taken care of. That's a practical one. And then we just sit down and play, welcome into our home. And we don't have high expectations. We don't cover rules right away. We don't. Um, Another really practical thing is we don't try to get them to explore new foods. We ask them what their favorite food is, and that's what we do.
oh,
99% of the time, it's pizza or chicken nuggets. So those are things that we always make sure we have when we're expecting new kiddos. So, and then we always make sure we have food on the tables and we, show them this is where you can go to the bathroom and this is where you're going to sleep and this is where you can come if you need a snack. Just making them feel as comfortable and as welcome as possible as quickly as possible.
I love that. I saw a post that you did on Instagram pretty recently about unpacking. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yes. So we do a lot of respite care. We have, gosh, basically a new toddler or preschooler every weekend in our home. And so, one thing we like to do is get the bag out of the way. Um, we go ahead and unpack their suitcase, and I put it in a hanging door storage. It's on the back of the door. And I unpack all their stuff and get the suitcase out of the way because those suitcases are really they're hard for the kids to see. It either makes them think of birth family and going home to them, or it makes them wonder about their foster family and where they are and if they're going to come back, or it just, makes them on edge, wondering where they're going to go next, because that's what happens when a suitcase comes out or clothes get packed. So we go ahead immediately, pull those things, put them in the over the door shoe hanger. That way they're there. They're separate from my kids' things. I don't have to worry about trying to, um, you know, find them in the drawers later. I can get those separate and we hang a laundry bag and all their dirty clothes go directly into that bag so that when we do laundry, everything stays separate for them.
I'm sure as each time that you do this, you probably think of more things
Yes.
to do to ease the transition. And that's so awesome, though. So, one thing that I've noticed is there seems to be a big misconception about the children who are in foster care. So, I think there's a big misconception that a lot of these kids are like juvenile delinquents, and that is not why kids go into foster care. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Paula?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Um, so the reality is these kids are in foster care because an adult failed them. It has nothing to do with them or their behavior. Now, sometimes, we do see some behaviors out of children, but behaviors are symptoms. Behaviors are symptoms that there's a problem, that they are hurting, and that they have needs that are going unmet. So, the reality is, you just need to get in there and love on these kids, and we can kind of get to the real root of the problem. But it's not that they're bad kids. It's not that they're juvenile delinquents. It's not that they're in there because of this. They're in there because an adult failed them and an adult couldn't properly care for them. And it has nothing to do with the child. The child is a victim, and we wouldn't go around punishing other victims for, something. So we shouldn't do that to these children. I mean, they're children, regardless of their behaviors or what they've been through. They are just children, and they need us. They need somebody who's willing to step in for them and fill in that gap and listen and not judge and help meet those needs. The statistics for children who leave foster care, um, who are not reunified or adopted, but are just old enough to no longer be in care. That's scary. And that's just all the more reason for families to step up, because once they're in a loving home and they're in a loving environment, we can make an impact on their lives and prevent that from happening.
Yes, that's so helpful. Thank you so much for clarifying that. So I was doing some research just going into this episode, and one of the things that I saw is that there are over 100,000 kids in the foster care system right now who are legally free to be adopted. And that means that their parents' rights have already been revoked. So I know that y'all stepped into foster care to walk alongside children and their parents whose rights had not yet been revoked. And the goal of being a foster family should always start with the hope that these kids can reunify with their family. So, obviously, this can be a very confusing thing because you'll hear a lot of people say, oh, well, we want to foster to adopt. But the point of foster care, like being a foster family, is always reunification with their family. But there are over 100,000 kids who have been in the foster care system, but their parents' rights have already been revoked and they can be adopted. So, anyway, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. There are, like you said, 100,000 kids waiting, and that number grows day by day. The majority of those children are older children and kids with special needs, or more complex needs. And they're still waiting. People come in and they say, I'm going to foster to adopt, because they think that that's a cheap route to adoption. And that is not what foster care is for. There are absolutely children,
Yeah.
like you said, who need to have a parent step in or someone step in for them to be a parent. But the average foster care situation is not that. What we need is people to step in for the families, because the ultimate goal is reunification. And when safe, that is the best situation possible um, for these kids. I know it's really hard. It's one of these emotional roller coasters, because you love these kids, but you're supposed to. That's the job that you step into. Like we say that we attach at yes. So as soon as we get a call, we are already anticipating and planning and praying and loving for these children. And if they don't come, because sometimes that happens, we've said yes several times, and for whatever reason, the children don't end up coming into our home. And there's a little bit of sadness, but there's also joy, because usually that means they're getting to stay with a sibling or family member. And that's exciting. And it's also hard because we have already attached. But that's what we signed up for. And I think that means that we're doing it right. um, because you're supposed to these kids need someone to step in and love them so much, even though they've never met them. So, and
Yeah.
I think when I hear people say foster adopt, I didn't get it until I stepped into foster care, until I sat in those training classes, and until I heard the stories and realized that the parents who are losing their rights for their children are hurt and broken children themselves. I mean, they may not be a child
Mm.
in age, but um, they're just, you know, a victim of the system themselves a lot of times. They've gone through their own traumatic events, and they need people to step in for them. And so that's what we signed up to do. And um, when our children actually came into care, we were 100% on board to co parent and to support their birth parents. And um, it didn't work out for their birth family. And that was really hard for us. We had to grieve with them, because we
Yeah.
had formed a relationship and we had parented. And I'll never forget the day that their birth mom asked me, she said, "This is just really hard. And if I can't do this, I just want to know if you can.
Oh.
And that was kind of the day that I said, okay, I have permission now to say, yes, if something happens and you can't, then I will adopt. Up until then, it just didn't feel right because we felt very clearly that we were called to fill in the gap and to support the parents as much as the children.
Yeah. I bet that was a great but tough conversation, I'm sure. So one of the stats I had read, and we can link these in the show notes where the source where we found some of this information, but was that 51% of children or youth in foster care reunite with their parents or their primary caregiver, which, math says 49% of them don't do that, which sounds like that's kind of what happened in your situation. So, when you found out that you would be able to adopt your foster kids at the time, I don't know, like you were mentioning that story just a second ago, and it seems so emotional. And I'm sure that was like, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I mean, was there a sense of like grief and joy? And I don't know, how did that all work together?
It was really hard. It was one thing that I was not expecting at all. I mean, obviously, I guess I just wasn't expecting the way the two emotions would collide because obviously we love these children and we had formed bonds and attached. And the thought of them leaving was hard and we didn't understand what we would do then either. But we were just trusting the Lord that He would just pick us up and hold us and walk us through it all. But then the reality of knowing that a mother isn't going to be able to be a mother for her children anymore, that was harder than I ever knew. Um, and
Oh,
this is, I mean, obviously kids are in foster care for reasons. We knew there were obviously obstacles, but we just really felt like we were going to get through it and we were going to both be there together rooting these kids on for the rest of their lives. And um, even after adoption, we had hoped to do that. And that's not the way it worked out, unfortunately. But it was a very emotionally charged event. Um,
yeah.
when she asked us if we would be willing to adopt, we, of course, I talked to her and I said, yes, of course. But it was several months before the courts decided that that's the
Oh,
way
wow.
their story would play out. So it was probably at least 6 months that,
Yeah.
we just didn't know. We didn't know how it would go. And you're simultaneously rooting for them and cheering them on and trying to be there all the time. And then you're also worrying, well, if they go home, what's going to happen in this situation and what's going to happen in this situation. So it's a lot of emotions to carry. And
Yeah.
I think you just have to remember that in the end, none of these children are ours. They've all been given to us by God, whether they come to us by adoption or by birth. And we just have to trust that He has the best in store for their life. And so that's where we
Yeah.
decided to put our faith. With foster care, there's a lot of fear too surrounding your biological children and what they might be exposed to. And it's the same kind of trust. You just have to realize that God didn't ask you to do this to destroy your family. So you just kind of have to put full trust and make sure that you're always got your guard up and just trust Him. And I can say with our biological daughter, like sometimes we look at her and we think, gosh, we really feel like, God has called us to this just for what it's doing in her life, because it's been amazing to watch her little heart and grow and just love others and serve others. And it's just been great. And now that, our younger two are adopted, they're the same way. These kids, they come into care and they oftentimes maybe never been allowed. Maybe all they've had to do is worry about themselves and how they were going to eat their next meal
Mm.
and how they were going to be cared for and where the person caring for them was, that kind of thing. And you wonder, like, are they going to be able to think, put others first? Because with foster care, they have to do that a lot. And gosh, it's just been remarkable to watch God just use their little hearts and heal them. And there's just this joy that they have knowing that they get to be a safe place for someone to land. And I think even more so for them because they know what it's like on the other side of it.
Oh, yes. Seriously, I can't even imagine that. It's just amazing how much of a capacity these kids have to love. And they understand so much more than we give them credit for. One thing that I hear people say all the time is, oh, well, I could never be a foster parent because I would get too attached. What do you guys think
Yeah,
about that?
you're
That's the
doing it right.
point. Like I mentioned,
Yeah.
yeah, we attach it. Yes, I mean you're supposed to get attached. You could go through this and you could keep yourself closed off and just meet daily needs, but that you're missing out.
Yeah. This is totally different, and I don't want to necessarily compare the two, but I will say something that I feel like I've learned even in the wait of the adoption process is specifically in regards to like private adoption when you're, talking with someone who maybe is an expectant mom, she's pregnant, it's like you don't want to get attached to that baby because it's not your child. But at the same time, I realize, worst case scenario, I pray for this kid as if I was praying for my own child. I pray that they're healthy. I pray that they grow up to be brave and strong. And, I like journal about them. I read Bible verses over them. Worst case scenario, my heart gets broken, but they could still reap the benefit from it. And so it was like I gave in to like I can love this baby in utero even though it's not mine. And they'll never know a difference one way or another. They just had somebody extra praying for them, and I can allow myself to go through some hurt down the road. But I don't know. That was like a mental shift for me, like halfway through our wait to adopt our daughter, and it honestly made it a lot easier. And I know that sounds so odd because there was at least two of those babies that we didn't adopt, But I don't regret for a second all the times that I prayed for them, and you know. I don't know. I know it's not the same, but I do think it's okay to let yourself love someone.
Absolutely. It is absolutely the same. Anytime you can just lay it all out there and give that child love, whether we always say they're in our homes for a moment and our hearts for a lifetime.
Oh, I love that.
Paula, you were mentioning this earlier, and I didn't chime in then, but I was thinking, so I'm going to bring it back up. I, we have been waiting to adopt for, I don't know, 8 months or so. I have to go back and do the math. It's, my brain is fried these days. But we were prepared to adopt, and, mentally, that's what we were planning on, hoping for. But then when the time actually came and we actually picked her up, I mean, my emotions were wrecked, truly. Like, it was like I was joyful that we had a child, but at the same time, I was hit with, like, this weird grief that I've never experienced, and I really did not know what to do with it. So, again, it's different than foster care because your expectations might be a bit different, I'm sure, but I can totally relate with everything you were saying earlier about the conflicting emotions because nobody can really prepare you for it.
Yes. Yeah, you can't be prepared for it, and you've been rooting this whole time that it wouldn't happen. I think in foster care, if you're really truly rooting for the parents and cheering them on, then you're kind of hoping that it doesn't come to adoption. I mean, the way they do it, you have two plans, and when one of those plans fails, and all of a sudden rights are terminated. I mean, I remember being in that courtroom and I wept for her. I just was so heartbroken. And looking back on it, I feel like a lot of people might have been more happy and relieved to see that, they were going to get to spend a forever lifetime with these children. And I couldn't see that at the time. I was not at all expecting like my love for her to trump my love for our family. And in that moment, that's what happened. I just became overwhelmed with grief for her. And um, that continued on, several months. The courts continue to draw out, it's after TPR, it's not an automatic thing. It's a very long process. And it's another 6 or 8 months before adoption. And is finalized. And even after adoption is finalized, it doesn't fix these emotions that are there. So every holiday, every first, like first tooth lost or, first time saying the alphabet or, whatever it is, because our kiddos are young still. And every single one of those first, I think of her and I think of how proud she would have been.
Well, Paula, first of all, thank you for sharing all this with us because I know that it is not easy to rehash some of these things that you have experienced in the past. So, one, just thank you for sharing because I feel like this will be truly helpful for so many people who are fostering, considering, or are in a situation where they may be, adopting their current kiddos in foster care. So I know it's been helpful, but I also know there's a lot of people who have a heart for foster care and for the kids who are a part of foster care right now, but aren't able to actually foster themselves. So I would love to know, just as a foster family, what are some ways that non-foster families can best support our foster families and the foster kids?
Yeah. So I hear a lot of times, like, I would love to do that, but we're not in a place to do that. And I get that. Not everyone is called to be a foster parent. So, but everyone can step up and just support them. As foster parents, we are tired. I don't think anyone understands the level of reporting and paperwork and everything else that just puts a mental strain on you. And so anything that would bless you would bless us. So if it would just make your day, if someone just showed up and took your kids for ice cream, then call up a foster parent and say, hey, can I take your kids to get ice cream? And just, let you have a few minutes. It doesn't have to be long. That's amazing. We had people do that for us, and my daughter remembers that as being one of her favorite things. And meals, obviously, if you have a gift and you are, I don't know, if you've got sons or husbands or even you knows how to work a lawnmower, like offer to come mow the yard. Just really practical things because between courts and therapies and doctor visits and caseworker visits, sometimes getting out there and getting the yard mowed is difficult, getting a meal on the table is just stressful. So those are all very practical things that you can just step in and love on them. You can pray for us. Always, everybody find a foster family and just pray for them every night. Offer to be a listening ear to them. Um, one thing my mom actually did for me is she wrote scripture down and I taped it to all my cabinet doors just to constantly have it in front of me. And it was just something I didn't have the time to write it down. Um, I don't know, many people may not, if you aren't familiar with foster care, you may not understand. So, anytime a child has to take medicine, Benadryl, Tylenol, whatever, it has to be documented and it has to be prescribed, at least in our state. So, there's the act of getting a prescription, and there's filling out medication logs, and then there's monthly or weekly emails and check-ins with caseworkers. And so they're all just things that take time, lots of time, and just can be emotionally draining. So anything you can think of is will bless us.
Wow, that really is such a good way to put it. Like, anything that would bless you would bless a foster family. That just really frees people up because I think sometimes, for me anyway, I tend to be an overthinker, and I have a lot of ideas, but I am not the best at follow through. And so I feel like a lot of times I'm like, "Oh, I should do something for so and so." But, like, just sending a $10 Venmo with a coffee emoji just doesn't feel like enough. So I'm like, "Well, I'd rather wait until I could do whatever elaborate." But really, it's the little things, like, think about how we would feel if somebody just sent me $5 for a coffee. I would feel so blessed and loved and cared for, and I know, foster moms would feel the same way. So just any little thing, I just think that's a great point.
It's all just very super easy stuff that anyone can do. And I will say also, just to the foster parents out there listening, a good friend of mine is a foster mom, and she's amazing. She has a little toddler who's close to my daughter's age, and they're little best buddies. But I've gotten to pick her up from school a couple of times for her because she's actually a single foster mom at that, which is just the ultimatum. I don't know how she does what she does, but she the other day was like, "I'm so sorry, I hate to ask." I'm like, "No, like, I genuinely love getting to." It's so simple, it doesn't take me an extra 30 minutes maybe, And the fact that I can be a part of this and help in some way, just it does a lot for me as much as for her, I'm sure, you know?
Yeah. It really, you don't realize just how important those little $10 coffee gift cards are to us, because what seems like a little insignificant thing to you, to me as a foster mom, and I know, I don't want to speak for everyone, but I know a lot of us feel this way, says that we are seen. And in a very lonely position, to be seen feels amazing. And so, we really appreciate those little things.
Oh, yes, for sure. This is good motivation slash encouragement for me to make sure that I'm loving on all of my mom friends, but especially the foster moms that I know.
Yeah, the reality is we're just, a lot of us feel like we signed up for this, so we don't have the right to ask for help. I know that's the way I felt. I felt like I had signed up for this and I was literally licensed to do this. So who was I to be asking for help? And um, I read a quote that said, a true friend doesn't wait for an invitation, or it said, need doesn't wait for an
Mm.
invitation. It gently steps in and offers a hand. And it just spoke volumes to me, like, because we don't have to wait for someone to ask for help, because a lot of times they won't. We can just step in and say, here's what I can do. Can I do it? And the answer is probably going to be yes. We will appreciate it.
Yeah. So, Paula, just for a couple final thoughts, I know there are probably some people listening who are on the fence about should we do foster care, should we adopt? Obviously, there are different routes that you go to do each of these things, different things that you have to consider. What would you kind of tell someone who is on the fence and trying to figure that out?
Yeah. First of all, I would tell you to figure out, you really need to examine your heart and figure out what you're willing to do as a family. Are you willing to step in that gap and support a birth mom who doesn't necessarily have a great track record, or a birth dad who doesn't have a great track record, but is fighting for their children? Are you willing to step up and fight for them and be on their side and know that loving this child means saying goodbye? And if not, then foster care might not be for you. This might not be the route. Or, like you mentioned, there are 100,000 kids in care that are already legally free. Maybe that's the option that you need to go. I know there are some local state agencies, you can foster and then ask specifically for a child who is already legally free. And so if you're not willing to walk alongside these parents through some of their darkest days, then that's probably the option you need to take. And if you are, then just strap on your seatbelt and prepare yourself for what is sure to be the wildest ride you've ever experienced, because no two cases are the same. No two children are the same. No two birth families are the same. No two judges are the same. Like, foster care is just this unique um, thing that everyone's story is different and everyone's story is a little similar, but it is a wild ride, and most definitely some of the hardest but greatest things that I think we've ever done in our whole life. So it's definitely been an adventure. And then the other thing I would say is to just make sure that you're both on the same page. And if you have any trauma history of your own or any grief that's unresolved, I would work through that first. Because when you start parenting children with trauma and those little behaviors, we always say behaviors are a symptom of hurt. But when those little behaviors are coming at you and you're being oftentimes hit or yelled at and stuff like that, it can a lot of times trigger your own hurt. So if you have those things in your past, absolutely make sure you go into it healthy for you and have a plan to stay healthy. For me, I told my mom from the very beginning, I said, I'm going to need somebody who is willing to just keep pushing me on. There's going to be plenty of friends who even though they love you and they have the best intentions and they love your family, they're going to tell you to quit. When you call them and tell them it's hard, they're going to tell you to quit because they don't understand it and they don't understand the call that it is on your life. And so if you're wanting to do this, then find someone who will cheer you on and who will tell you, nope, you're wrong. You need to approach it differently, or, just really challenge you. And that's what my mom did for me. She listened. There was no judgment, but she also challenged me and, reminded me that it's not a big deal if they don't eat their green beans. I mean, sometimes when you're struggling, those are the kind of things that we get hung up on and we're not even sure how we got there. And, my mom just said, listen, it's not a big deal. You just got to let that go. So, you just need somebody to tell you to lower your expectations and remind you of all the things that you're, trying to keep in mind with other people as well.
Oh my gosh. I need your mom in my life. But for real, that was so wise. All of that was so helpful. And it's so funny. I actually follow another foster mom, and she has a letterboard in her kitchen, or at least she used to. I don't know. But she had posted it way back, and I still remember, and it said, lower your expectations. And then on the next line, it said, lower. And then there was another line that said, nope, lower. So anyway, oh man, unmet expectations are never fun, but that really is so, so helpful. So anyway, is there anything else that you would like to add that we haven't gotten to talk about?
I think that's it. Like I said, I mean, if you are thinking about it at all, then keep praying about it and keep saying no. And if it comes back up, then it's a yes, because it is definitely worth it. Like I said, it's definitely the greatest thing that we've ever done. We love it. A couple of weeks ago, someone made comment, I mean, bless their hearts. People just say things and they don't always understand what they're saying, but someone just said something about us being so selfless. And I was like, not really. It's pretty selfish because I love to play with the kids. Like we're in a great season right now doing a lot of respite and we just have friends to play. Like that's all we see is friends to play. I don't have any of the court cases or history or anything like that. All I know is I got a kid who needs me to feed him some food and give him a safe place to sleep and hang out with him and just make him have a blast. So we do a lot of different things to just kind of we make sure they have a great weekend when they're here. So that's
Oh,
our
I
goal is
love
to shoot for the best weekend ever.
Now, can anyone become a respite family, or do you have to go through the whole foster care certification?
Okay, so in our state, and I think it does vary a little bit, but in our state, you have to go through the training to provide respite. Now, don't let that scare you off because you can do the training and do the respite, and then you have the flexibility to say, no, I'm busy that weekend, or no, I can't do this. And respite care workers are absolutely needed. We actually recently switched our license from therapeutic back down to basic because we had a mama who sat in my driveway, and when I was, taking the kiddo back out, she said, you would keep them again? And I said, absolutely. And she just cried. And she told us that she had gone to have, tried to have, a little weekend away, and people called her back in a couple of hours. So, and, so these families, they need this time with their own family. They need to be able to celebrate their older children's lives, their younger children's lives, whatever it is. They need this time to step away and have some self-care. And so respite is a very easy way to help them. In our state, you can also just do what's natural support. So if you have a family that you are friends with and you're kind of wrapped around them, just tell them you want to be a natural support. You can give them your social security numbers and probably get fingerprinted, but they will allow you to have the children in your home for overnight and to kind of, you can help pick them up from school and that kind of thing and be that person without going through the training classes, although the training is really helpful. So don't let that scare you if that's something that you have to do, if that ends up being a requirement of your state, because it is helpful and you will learn so much that will help not only you with a foster child, but just any child, the training you get in there, I wish they would make every parent go through it. It's so helpful. But so if you want to do natural support, that's absolutely an option without the classes.
Wow, that is a great option. So people, I'm sure, can just look up by their state or call their local DHS office and get some more information on what they can do there as far as from state to state. And one thing I was thinking about when you were talking about something a stranger told you a minute ago, another thing that I often hear people say is, oh, you're so, not to me, but like about foster families are like, oh, it takes a special kind of person to do that. How do you feel about that?
Especially crazy. That's what I always say. No, it doesn't. I mean, outside of being willing to have flexibility with my schedule, no, I 100% disagree. I can assure you that I am doing nothing special over here. My kids are eating the mac and cheese in the box too, and we're just taking every moment as we can, just like you are. The only difference is we're just willing to be a little more flexible with our schedule and keep an extra bed.
Yes.
That's awesome. Well, Paula, thank you so much for joining us. I feel like this is hopefully helpful for so many people, but I've also just enjoyed hearing your story and learning a little bit more about foster care myself. So we really appreciate you spending the time with us today and hope that, there's lots of fruit that comes from this conversation for people that we may never even know about.
Thank you guys for having me.
Well, friends, we are so glad that you joined us for another episode. We hope you enjoy listening and learning. We'd be honored if you'd leave us an honest review before you go. And did you know that November is National Adoption Awareness Month? We have lots of plans and can't wait to share them with you, so make sure you're following us on social media at AdoptWell, and feel free to check out our website at www.adoptwell.com. We look forward to spending more time with you in the future as we learn together how we can adopt well.